I had no idea the British press was so bigoted.
This one's wife. Skint. Using cheap labour. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. The money problems of this one's wife and Prince Harry receive repeated coverage. A combination of the fact that they have significant overheads by virtue of security, mortgage, PR puff pieces, expensive clothing that doesn't fit, expensive pieces of jewellery, transport costs, and day-to-day living, alongside the fact that there is no appreciable income, makes for a poor equation indeed. This has resulted in suggestions that they're very much feeling the pinch, and while they're not running around with their arses hanging out just yet, there is a desperation to try and land the deals, but they're not happening. They're not happening for obvious reasons. They're a talentless duo, and very few people actually like them, so why would you risk your brand being associated with a pair of abject losers? This financial catastrophe has meant that there needs to be some penny pinching taking place, and it would follow that in the circumstances you would need to make cutbacks. There is the suggestion that because they're skintish, that they are having to make certain cutbacks in various areas of their life. And according to a post unearthed by Daisy Beach 23 on the subreddit Saint This One's Wife, they use a full name, I do not, a blind item from Enti Lawyer tells us the illiterate one and her husband are in a big money crunch. So far, so realistic. So are choosing to not renew the contracts of people who know what they are doing, because those deals cost the most. Well, on the face of it, that's actually a bit of sensible action. If you can't afford it, you can't have it. It's often the case that narcissists utilise the goodwill of other people, the money of other people. They may even go so far as to take out loans in the name of other people and use their credit cards because of that sense of entitlement, lack of boundary recognition, and absence of emotional empathy. Many narcissists engage in asset appropriation, taking things that don't belong to them, but in their world, they're entitled to do so. It's often the case that you'll see that certain fraudsters are motivated by that sense of entitlement attitude. For instance, in basic terms, those that commit fraud fall into one of two groups. There's the first group that do it out of necessity. So, for example, there may be a lady who works in the accounts department at a particular company. She's worked there 10 years and has been a loyal and obedient servant to the company. Never posed any problems, but then her husband loses his job and becomes unwell. This places a strain on the family budget, and the consequence of that is that rather than lose the house, for instance, she starts to steal money from her employer. She knows she's doing wrong, she feels bad about it, it gives her sleepless nights, and in actual fact, there is a sense of relief when she's eventually caught. She's done it because of circumstance. The second category is where the individual takes the money, recognises that what they're doing is wrong, but they see it as justified because they're a narcissist and they're driven by a sense of entitlement, an absence of remorse or emotional empathy, an absence of accountability. They see that money as rightfully theirs, and all they're doing is taking what belongs to them. For instance, such an individual may well steal from an employer, and their response when caught out is to say, "This company would go under without me," or "This is the bonus that I should have been paid but wasn't. After all, I'm the one that delivers results in this company." It might be true that they deliver the results, or that might also be a further delusion. But the narcissistic mindset that they have causes them to commit fraud with the justification that they're allowed to do this because they're special, that they're brilliant, that they're keeping the company afloat, that they're the one that makes the biggest sales, that they're actually underpaid and they should be paid a greater level, and therefore all they're doing is getting the balance right. Thus, many narcissists exhibit this sense of entitlement when it comes to money, and interestingly, this one's wife is actually showing a degree of responsibility in this activity. However, it's being enforced upon her because ultimately, of course, she wants to keep her money to herself. And rather than, for instance, cut back in relation to buying oversized clothing that doesn't suit her or cut back on PR puff pieces, she decides we'll cut back on people who know what they're doing. They're expensive. Actually, they cost too much. These individuals are actually overpaid. Hence, that's why we've seen the recent departures. NT Lawyer also tells us to replace these people who've gone. They've brought in at least one intern from college who they can pay minimum wage rather than mid-six figures. Now, naturally, you ought to cut your cloth, but as I just pointed out, this one's wife won't make sacrifices when it comes to her jewellery, or her PR puff pieces, or her mortgage, or her clothing. Why? Because that's all about presentation. And as a somatic narcissist, she needs to show the world that she looks a particular way. And that status is important to her, as I mentioned in a video just recently. Where she's got a choice between thinking, I'll pay someone a decent salary because they're very good at what they do, which means they will produce excellent work for me, or if I do that, well, I'll have to make some sacrifices with regard to my status. The narcissism doesn't let that happen. Instead, it says, you need to look good, and you need to have those PR puff pieces, and you need to travel by private jet, and you need to have all of that security wandering around with you, even though nobody's that interested in you. So in actual fact, we're going to have to cut the cloth when it comes to employees. So this person who could create brilliant content and actually turn things around with regard to your stupid Archwell, we're going to let them go. And we're going to bring in wet behind the ears, enthusiastic intern who hasn't a clue as to what they're really doing, was a lovely person, but is new to the industry. They're cheap though, so that means you can still go and buy things to look like Chairman Mao visiting New York. And accordingly, although I leave it for you to determine the veracity of blind items such as this, it does make sense that this is what this one's wife is engaging in as a consequence of the financial crunch that they're experiencing, resulting in her narcissism directing her to keep the expenditure in relation to making her look good, because that's all part of presenting that image to the outside world, which matters to her, so that she can then subconsciously control people and draw fuel from them by supposedly looking so good and influencing them through the PR puff pieces, and instead will allow Archwell to tank by bringing in newbies and rookies who are well-intentioned but do not have the ability or clout of the people that we're letting go because we can no longer afford them. We're not going to make the cuts to the image, we're going to make the cuts to the substance, which just demonstrates the skewed perspective of this one's wife. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.